Today I'm going to find out if ChatGPT can actually solve all my snake issues. Help! My snake has a respiratory infection. So let's go ahead and break down each of these topics and see if AI is correct. The first point was to increase your humidity in your cage. I couldn't agree more. There's no doubt that dry environments actually can cause little minor cracks in the snake's lungs or air sacs, and in there bacteria can actually grow, aiding in respiratory infection. Even as humans, if you think about it, when you take a hot shower with lots of steam, it actually helps your respiratory system. So it's no doubt that this tip definitely is right. Second one is to provide a warm, humid hide for your snake, because respiratory infections actually cause difficulty breathing. It's important to give them warm, humid place to rest and recover. Absolutely true. The thing is, you don't want to get it too hot, right? You want it to be warm, but not too warm. You know, with a ball python, for instance, which do have a lot more problems with respiratory infections than a lot of other snakes, you definitely want that hot spot to be maybe 90, 92. You don't want it to be 105 because that can aid to actually other issues. You don't want to burn calories, not to mention if you raise the temperature too much, it actually usually lowers the humidity. So keeping a warm hide, absolutely right. Number 3, make sure to clean the enclosure regularly to prevent buildup of bacteria, to make sure that your snake's infection doesn't get worse. I mean, in theory, you should always keep your animals clean, right? When you have a snake that is sick, you want to keep it extra clean. But if you're keeping it clean all the time, this is something that's just normal practice, but I do agree with this point. Number 4, offer food and water. Make sure your snake is eating and drinking as much as possible during its illness, because it's important to continue offering food and water as well. This is the part where they're kind of a little bit wrong. And when it comes to snakes in particular, yes, you want them to stay hydrated. Very important. Lots of water. 100% accurate there, because again, higher humidity, more hydration, it's going to make the animal actually potentially get better. But I'm not a fan of offering food, to be honest with you, because typically when a snake has a respiratory infection, it won't eat. And if you're offering, in particular, live food, it's actually a stress to the actual animal. Now, if you're offering frozen thawed, it's okay. My experience with the snakes has respiratory, they typically don't eat. And I'm just talking about getting them healthy as much as possible. And I'm not worried as much about food, unless for some reason they went a long period of time without food. You may have to consider something like tubing for nutrients or something on that line. Number 5, antibiotics. Your snakes will need antibiotics to treat the infection. Your veterinarian will be able to determine the best course of treatment and prescribe the right medication. I agree with this. And I've always said this. There's a lot of bad vets out there. There's no doubt about it. And it's not that they're bad vets. I shouldn't say that. What I'm saying is they just don't know enough about snakes and reptiles to understand. So you got to find a right reptile vet. If you do find a correct, good reptile vet, they will prescribe a right course of action with antibiotics. So I do agree with this. If a snake does have a bad respiratory infection, a lot of times antibiotics is the only way to actually cure it. So far, I actually agree with ChatGPT. Help! My snake has mites. What do I do now? All right, let's go ahead and break this down. Let's say we have a snake with mites right here, and what do? Do we isolate the snake, because mites can travel from one snake to another? 100% accurate there. If you can possibly get that snake out of the way, that's completely good, because mites are actually a nomadic. Believe it or not, mites at night, because they're also nocturnal, can move up to 10 feet in a night. So if you have a snake right here, there's a pretty good chance that all the snakes around it are going to get mites. So also when you're treating a snake, you want to treat all the snakes around, even if it doesn't look like mites are on them, because there's a pretty good chance that there's actually mites traveling all over the place. So isolating snake is a good idea if you can do it. Next one would be clean the enclosure thoroughly. Now this one I'm a little bit unsure of on this one. You know, yes, in a way you don't want the mites to be in the enclosure, but if you actually clean the enclosure, if you're not super careful, you can be dumping the enclosure or taking the bedding out, and the mites actually can spread from there. So I personally like to treat the animal for about 7 days before I clean the enclosure, because that way I'm containing the problem into that enclosure. When you actually start to do things, you can actually be spreading mites more. So although I don't totally disagree with this, I would disagree with it from the standpoint it's something that I personally don't do, because I do think there's a chance that you could spread mites even more if you're cleaning the enclosure. So I'm not going to give them a terrible score on this one. But personally, something I wouldn't do. Treat the snake. The snake can be treated with dust or anti-mite powder by applying an anti-mite spray directly to the skin. This is another tough one. Yes, there is stuff like Preventamite that is really, really good for actually getting rid of mites, but you're not actually supposed to be applying it to the skin. You're supposed to be applying it to the cage, because again, what your thoughts are is that mites are nomadic, right? So they get off the snake at some point, they get onto the bedding and the side of the cage, whatever the case is. That treatment, which is actually a pyrethrin type of a spray, actually gets on the mites and kills the mites. So I don't know of any treatments that I personally like to use that I'm spraying the actual snake itself with the treatment, but I definitely think treating the animal and treating the cage is imperative. Monitor the snake, keep an eye on it so that you're sure that the snake mites have been eliminated. I couldn't agree more. I mean, obviously it's really important. Another tip is the fact that snake bites typically have a life cycle of about 28 days. Once you treat that snake, it's really important to treat it again about a month later. We do it about every 2 weeks for about 4 treatments, just to make sure, because what can happen is you can kill all the adult mice, but they could have laid eggs within the scales themselves and then actually hatch out 28 days later, and now you repeat the process all over. If you continue to treat long enough, us up to 2 months, we actually eliminate. And I tell you what, in the past we've had mites. Everyone that keeps snakes for any period of time do get mites, but we haven't had a problem with mites in at least 7 or 8 years. Help! My snake has scale rot. What do I do? Let's see if ChatGPT did a good job here. Isolate your snake to prevent the spread of infection. It's important that you isolate the snake from any other reptiles you have. That I agree. You know, whenever you have an issue with a snake or a reptile that's having any kind of a problem, isolating that animal or quarantining it is always the right course of action. Number 2 would be clean the affected area. Gently clean the affected area with a mild antiseptic solution to remove any debris or dead tissue. Again, I think it's super important, especially with scale rot, to keep things super clean. I mean, the cleaner you can keep that enclosure, the better it's going to be. Unlike the snake mite situation, cleaning is important. Again, you should always keep your reptiles clean, but when they have something like scale rot, it is super important to kill whatever bacteria is in there, in particular fungal infections, because a lot of scale rot actually cause from fungal infections, not as commonly bacterial infections. So clean environment, very important. Number 3 was apply antiseptic ointment, such as betadine, to the affected area to prevent secondary infections to promote healing. It's a tricky one, right? Don't want to apply an ointment if it's a fungal infection. If it's a bacterial infection, then you do want to apply ointment. Now, betadine isn't a problem either way. It's going to help either way. So that I agree with. When it comes to the ointment, though, I'd be a little bit careful, because if you're trapping the fungus in, it's actually doing worse. It could actually be kind of bad for it. This is kind of good and bad advice depending on the bacterial or fungal. And piggybacking on that is placing an animal in a warm, humid hide. It sounds like some of these answers are pretty similar to some of the ones with the respiratory infection. If it happens to be a fungal infection, what does fungus like to grow? Warm, humid places. You don't want to provide a warm, humid place for something that is going to thrive like fungus, right? Definitely think warm is important. Humid, not so much. As a matter of fact, I would actually prefer to keep the animal more dry, very clean, and warm, because they have a better chance of actually reducing the chance of that infection continuing to spread, and hopefully start to kill it. Because again, killing fungus, take away humidity, and the fungus starts to die. And lastly, it's giving antibiotics. Again, this is the exact same answer that came from the respiratory infection, literally word for word about the veterinary care and everything like that. So in this case, I think that AI has some limitations, because they're just using like, hey, there's an infection, just do the exact same thing for every infection. Every single sickness with a snake is a little bit different, so you have to treat it differently. If it's a fungal infection, antibiotics aren't going to do anything for you. And in my experience, the majority of scale rot typically is fungal infection, not so much bacterial infection, so the antibiotic really isn't going to help very much. Now I'm going to give you one of my tips that ChatGPT did not give you, and that's actually foot fungal powder. That's right. If you have a fungal infection, you can use like Lotrimin or something like that and put it on the animal. It kills the fungus. You've got to be careful. You don't want to over-treat it, but it does help kill the fungus. If it happens to be a fungal infection with scale rot, which usually it is, foot fungal powder will typically cure it. But again, you don't want to over-treat, so be very careful with that, but that is a hack that has worked for me in the past. ChatGPT, there's an alligator on my floor. Help, my snake isn't eating. What do I do? Alright, you want to see if AI knows what it's talking about? Let's start with check temperature snakes may eating. If their environment is too hot or cold, make sure the temperature in the enclosure is right. I agree with that. Obviously, it's true. I mean, temperature and humidity is super important. You want to make sure that it's within the range. Getting too hot can be a problem too, right? Snakes don't have a way to regulate their temperature, so if your temperatures are too hot, can stress the snake out, could actually cause it to not eat. So make sure your temperatures are right on the money. Check the size of prey. Make sure that the prey isn't too large, isn't too small. I mean, this is kind of right. I mean, I'm going to give them a pass on this one, because that's a little bit broad, but a snake can eat a much larger meal at sometimes, eat a little bit smaller meal at other times, but you don't want to offer, you know, a half-grown ball python a pinky mouse, because obviously it's not going to eat it, but you don't want to offer it a rabbit either. But if you're somewhere in the range of size, you're probably going to be okay when it comes to feeding. Check the feeding schedule. Some species of snakes can only eat once or every 2 weeks or longer. Make sure you're not offering food too frequently or infrequently. I mean, that's right. I mean, snakes typically eat every 7 to 10 days. A big meal, it might go 2 or 3 weeks. You know, snakes can go off of food. So, yeah, I would give them to this one. That's probably correct. Offer live prey. If your snake is used to eating live prey, it may be more likely if you offer live prey rather than frozen thawed. This is a tricky one, guys, okay? I mean, obviously, we would prefer everything to eat frozen thawed if at all possible. But when it comes to, say, ball pythons like we've been looking at, they do like live food a lot, and I don't disagree. If a snake isn't eating, I would rather try live food than have it not eat, especially if a snake has gone 2-3 months without food. I would rather not be stubborn and go, I'm only going to feed it frozen thawed, and slowly my snake is deteriorating, whereas, you know, if I can offer it live food, it's going to actually eat. So although I don't just say like, hey, if your snake didn't eat once, throw a live mouse or a live rat in there, but if it is something like a ball python that's historically going to eat more live food, sometimes you have to feed live. I don't like it, but sometimes you have to do it. Consult a veterinarian. If you tried all the steps and it just isn't eating, the best is to seek veterinary care. Your veterinarian can perform a physical examination necessary to test and determine the underlying cause, problem, recommended, blah, 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 blah. Again, this is a tough one. You know, I know some really good vets. I know some really bad vets when it comes to reptiles. I am not a person that thinks that like the next step to do is to take your animal to the vet. There are times where you need to take your animal to a vet. There's no doubt about it. But when a snake isn't eating, you really have a ton of things you could do before you actually seek veterinary care. And a lot of times when you take a snake to a veterinarian when it's not eating, they don't really know what to do either. I mean, what are they going to do to get your snake to eat? Now, yes, if it has some underlying health issue, 100%. But if your snake is super healthy and not eating, honestly, a vet isn't going to help you at all. Turns out that ChatGPT didn't know what to do with my pet alligator. I have a feeling it's just about putting him back in his pond. Keep going. He's trained. Look at that. Keep going this way. Keep going. There you go, buddy. Whew. He's getting way too heavy to get him out of that pond and back in. He needs a bigger pond too. Help! My snake is egg bound. Provide a suitable lay box. I couldn't agree more. Even when it comes to monitor lizards, basically if they don't have a place to lay, they will hold their eggs and they'll bind up. Same thing goes with snakes. I mean, you want something moist, you want something kind of in a nice warm spot in the cage where they feel really safe, that they feel secure, and they think that, hey, my eggs are gonna be okay, right? So yes, 100% provide a great lay box. Raise the temperature. Increasing the temperature in the enclosure can help stimulate the snake to lay its eggs. 85 to 90 degrees. Well, this is a tough one. A little bit yes, a little bit no, to be honest with you. Number one, your snake should already probably be at 85 to 90 degrees with the hot spot, so you shouldn't really raise it. If a snake gets egg bound and it's got the right temperatures, raising the temperature isn't going to have that snake lay eggs at all. Now, for some reason your snake is down at 70 degrees, then it's possible, and then you probably have a bigger problem than egg binding, to be honest with you. But you should have a spot about 85 to 90 where that snake can lay its eggs. Offer a moist environment, as you can mist the enclosure with water, moist towel cloth. Number one, yes, the snake should be hydrated in order to lay its eggs. You should have that moist lay box in there anyways. The humidity should already be up. If the egg binding happens, raising the humidity afterwards, I've never seen that be something that actually helps a snake lay eggs, but it's not going to hurt, but I don't know that it's going to help either. And then finally, seek veterinary care. I mean, yeah, absolutely. If your snake, you've done all these things and it's just not laying, and say it's 7, 8, 9 days after it was supposed to lay, and usually what will happen is they'll lay 1 or 2 or 3 eggs and then egg bind, or sometimes it's just the last egg that it egg binds on. So if that's 7 or 8 days or 10 days after, seeking a vet is definitely something that I would do if you didn't know how to do things yourself, because they can find out why is the snake egg bound. Does it actually have a oviduct that's twisted, maybe folded? Has it actually ruptured the oviduct and it's in the body cavity and needs surgery to get the egg out? So there's a whole bunch of different things. There's things that's called needle aspiration. There's massage aspiration. These are things that if you don't have experience, your vet very well may. And if your vet doesn't know what to do, I'm going to put a card right here, a video that I actually did about an egg bound snake. Oh no, my snake escaped. What do I do? Ready to break this down? This is going to be an interesting one, guys. All right, search the immediate area, look around things. Absolutely. I mean, I always say if a snake is gone, search everywhere. They're typically within like 10 or 12 feet. If it's within a short period of time, usually if a snake gets out here, it's going to be here, 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 here. It's probably not going to be across the building. So search everywhere. And I'm telling you what, snakes can hide in the smallest little spot. So search everywhere, 100%. Search, search, search. Number 2, ask for help. Absolutely. I mean, if, you know, when a snake gets out here, which is rare, thank God, we have the entire crew searching. You know, I mean, immediately we're searching everywhere to try to find that snake, because the longer that snake is out, the more chance it can get further and further away or get into a spot that is going to be harder to find. Number 3, this one's a little tricky. Offer food and scents. I have seen this work on occasion, but it's not frequent. So I wouldn't say don't do it, because it's not going to hurt to try to do it. I would say that 90% of the time it's not going to really be effective, because if a snake is out and hiding, you got to remember, it may not be hungry. You know, snakes eat 7 to 10 days. They can go months without food. So are they going to come out for food if they maybe just ate within the last couple days? Probably not. You could try it. Probably not going to help. I would say searching is the better part. This is where it gets tricky, guys. Number 4, check with neighbors. I mean, I don't know if you want to go to the neighbor and say, guess what, my snake is out. Have you seen it? I mean, number 1, if they've seen it, they're probably going to say something about it, right? Very rare for a snake to get out of a building unless you're actually in a place like in your house where there's a lot of like open spaces and stuff like that. But if it's in your house, it's probably going to stay within your house. Me personally, I'm not going to my neighbors to tell them that my snake is loose. And then number 5, post flyers on social media and maybe around your neighborhood. I couldn't think of a worse plan to doing that. I mean, talk about mass hysteria. Not to mention, you're probably going to get in some trouble by having like, oh, my pet snake is out. And I'm assuming, I don't even know what that means, you know, but I definitely don't think putting a sign up on your local telephone pole that your snake is out is going to net you anything good. And then number 6, seek professional help. I don't know where that is. I mean, I could go in the phone book. I've never seen a snake catcher in the phone book. Now, there are snake catchers, like let's say in the wild in Australia and Africa, if you have a snake that's a wild snake in your house to actually come get it. I don't know of any services where my snake escaped, can you come help find it? If you guys know, let me know down in the comments. Help, my power went out. Now what do I do to save my snake? Okay, let's check this out. Let's go to number 1. I'm going to be honest with you. This was pretty good. I mean, I can't see much fault in any of these. So check the temperature, consistent temperature, the power goes out, enclosure gets too low, could be life-threatening. Yeah, of course. Obviously, these animals are ectothermic or cold-blooded, meaning that they regulate their temperature based by the outside external temperature. So if it drops too low, it could definitely be threatening to the animal's life. Number 2 would be backup heat source. I couldn't agree more. If you can somehow have a backup, listen, if you have a generator, great. If you don't have a generator, a hot water bottle can definitely work for short periods of time. You can fill that hot water bottle, put it in there, and the snake can kind of nuzzle up to it. Again, if that's something like 2, 3, 4 hours, not that big of a deal. If it turns out to be 12, 14, 20 hours, definitely a bigger issue, and it's going to be harder. Again, your hot water heater might not work, so you might not be able to continue to get hot water, but definitely not a bad idea. Number 3, keep the enclosure covered. Absolutely 100%. You got to remember, if you have a screen top, a lot of heat's going to escape. If you can cover that, it's going to trap more heat in. Again, hopefully your power only goes out for an hour, 2 hours, something like that, and that can really help it a tremendous amount. Number 4, monitor temperature closely. I mean, yeah, I agree with this, you know, monitor temperature closely. The downside is if the temperature goes down, what do you do about it? Again, the heat bottle can work, but monitoring can help because that can actually make you say like, all right, now it's dropped below 70 degrees. It's time to take more action. Number 5, consider relocating. I think that this is probably the best one, right? If your power's out for more than 3, 4, or 5 hours, try to find a friend in the area that isn't have power outage. Move the animal to that. That way you avoid it because again, it's a nightmare if your snake doesn't have heat for 12, 14, 24, 48 hours. You're definitely going to lose your snake. So definitely relocate it if the temperature drops below a point and the power doesn't come back on. Help, my snake is stuck in shed. What do I do? All right, good stuff, bad stuff, or good stuff. I shouldn't say bad stuff. Good stuff and okay stuff. Number 1, increase the humidity. Absolutely. I mean, stuck shed is typically because the animal doesn't have enough humidity. It even happens to us here at the Reptarium. We try to keep the cage as humid as possible. We have a lot of humidity in the room, but every now and then the snake just needs a little bit more humidity. Increase that humidity, going to help the snake shed. Number 2, gently massage the stuck area. Now, I actually think that you should gently massage the area after a soak, not before a soak. You know, if that snake is still dry and you're trying to rub it off, there's a higher chance that you can actually injure the snake. I would always soak the snake, then rub it off, and you know the internet goes crazy about that, right? They love seeing it, and they love to hate on it because they're like, oh, you're never supposed to shed your snake. If a snake is stuck in shed and you soak it, it's important to get that shed off. It's soothing for the snake, and hey, it's soothing to watch. Number 3 is offer that warm soak I just talked about. Warm soak it 30 minutes, an hour. Make sure the water is warm. Snakes typically like it. It's a good thing. It definitely loosens that shed, and then if they don't shed off on their own, you can just actually help them peel it off, and it works out 99% of the time. That is going to solve your problem. Provide a rough surface. So yes, I mean, in your cage, you should have a rough surface because if they don't have something to rub against, like even our water dishes are a little bit porous and even the breeding center, that way they can rub on that water dish and actually get this thing up. But here at the Reptarium, all kind of rocky areas, and they can really use that to break their shed, rub up against to get their shed off. Number 5, seek veterinarian care. And I don't want to sound like I'm anti-veterinarian because I'm not. I have a couple good vets that I've used over the last 25 or 30 years. What I'm saying is that they are used too much or people think you need to go to them too much. I would never, ever, ever take a snake to a vet because it's not shedding, because it's something you can definitely solve yourself. You know, basically soak it in warm water, the shed's going to come up. What is a vet going to do? You're going to take it to a vet, they're going to charge you $100. They're not going to get the shed off. I mean, they're going to do the same thing you would do at home. So again, you know, I'm not anti-vet. I'm just saying that you got to use vets when it's appropriate. A shedding snake problem, that's not appropriate. Oh no, my snake just regurgitated. What do I do? Okay, let's break it down. Check the enclosure, make sure that the temperature and humidity, we keep talking about that. Yes, environment important. You know, snakes can only digest if they have a hot spot. You need a hot spot for them to go on. That's why oftentimes when you feed a nice big meal, you'll see the snake go to the hottest side of the cage, kind of sit on there. It helps digest that prey, right? So make sure your temperature, humidity, all that stuff is right. That could be a problem if it's a little bit low, they can regurgitate. Number 2, wait before feeding again. I agree with this 1000%. I do not agree with the 48 hours thing though, because you should never offer a snake that just regurgitated a meal 48 hours later. As a matter of fact, you should actually wait longer. If you feed once a week, I typically skip an entire week to let that digestive system really heal itself. So I'll go 2 weeks and then I feed a smaller meal. So if you feed it, say, a medium mouse, I would actually then feed a small mouse about 10 to 14 days later, not 48 hours later. Observe the snake, keep a close eye on it, you know, for its behavior. Of course, if a snake regurgitates, it does happen. Some snakes like colubrids regurgitate much more frequently than, say, pythons. So when a python regurgitates, it can be a much more serious problem. With the corn snake, you know, the regurgitation once or twice a year doesn't seem to be an issue. Maybe you just pushed it a little bit hard, a little bit too big a meal. So definitely observe your animal. If you see something wrong or something is not looking right, then absolutely take it to a vet. Consult a veterinarian. In this case, I actually do agree. Now, at first, I would again do what I said, you know, skip a meal, feed a smaller meal. If it doesn't regurgitate again, you don't have any problems. But if it does regurgitate a second time or a third time, a vet is really important. You can get some medication, metronidazole, or what they would call Flagyl, and that can actually really help solve the problem of regurgitation. So a vet in this case is really important if a snake continues to chronically regurg. Help, my snake won't stop biting. What do I do? All right, so let's break this down. Number 1, check the enclosure. We keep saying the same thing. I agree. Check the enclosure, temperature, humidity. I mean, you know, if it's cool, the snake is probably not going to be more irritable and biting. If it's hot, maybe possibly, but definitely always a good thing. Check the enclosure. Make sure your temperatures and humidities are always right. 2, handle your snake correctly. I could not agree more with this one. If you're handling your snake correctly, probably not going to bite. Of course, Lucky the Amazon tree boa, it's just a disposition thing. That species typically is a little bit more defensive when it comes to things that they don't like to be handled. So we really don't handle Lucky hardly at all. I mean, we don't take them out to play with them or anything like that. We take them out basically to clean its enclosure. But when you have species like ball pythons or boas or corn snakes or king snakes, they don't typically bite. So definitely handle the animal with confidence and care. You know, you want to make sure that you're not grabbing the animal, restraining the animal, stressing the animal out. And if you do that, there's a good chance your snake isn't going to bite. Observe the snake. You know, yeah, definitely keep a close eye on your snake. Make sure that's not acting weird. There's not some underlying thing that's causing your tame snake to all of a sudden want to bite, you know, because that could definitely be an issue. So I agree. Definitely always observe your snake, but to be honest with you, you should always be observing your animals to make sure that they're happy and healthy. Avoid feeding right before handling. Yeah, I mean, I always say you shouldn't handle before or after you feed. So give it a 24-hour period before you feed it and a 24-hour period after you eat it, or roughly in that range, especially after. You know, you could probably get away with 12 hours before, but after, you definitely don't want to handle a snake within maybe 24, maybe even 48 hours. Make sure that digestion system is going there. Again, my snakes don't bite when I handle them after 24 hours, but still they can be a little bit uncomfortable. Then 5, again, seek veterinary care. I'm wondering what a vet is going to do if I take my snake in and says that it's biting me. Now again, if there's a sickness and you are observing something and saying like my snake was super tame, now it's acting weird, it's doing this weird thing, and now it's biting, maybe a vet can see something wrong, but a vet isn't going to stop a snake from biting. I think that ChatGPT might be getting paid by the American Veterinarian Society a little bit. Again, I love you vets. If you're a vet out there, praise you. I hope you do well. Work on reptiles. Don't do the wrong thing to people. Don't charge people $100 to tell them that their snake needs some water or something like that. Taking animals to vets, important at the right time. Bitey snake, wrong time. That's it. So overall, ChatGPT actually did a pretty good job, and I think can be a really good resource in taking care of your animals, but keeping in mind that not everything they say is perfect. I think AI will get better and better over time, but overall, I tell you what, I would give this probably a 90 out of 100 score, but there was about a 10% thing that I disagreed with. Just like Googling stuff, you got to take it with a grain of salt. Do your research. Don't just take one thing and say that is 100% it. So overall, I definitely think this can be a good resource for you, and I think it actually helped. Hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you did, there's a playlist that you can watch all kinds of videos. You can also hit that subscription button. It would mean a lot to me. Also, hit that like button while you're down there. Have a wonderful day, Reptile Army. Remember, be kind to someone, and I promise